Thrash was born in the 80s, and along with it came the big four of thrash: Metallica,
Hey man, I need to see some action out there! Come on, you pussies!
Slayer,
I'll give you forever!
Anthrax, and Megadeth. But did they really earn their crowns? Let's uncover the surprising contenders and see who truly deserves to be etched into Thrash's Mount Rushmore. Before we dive into who belongs in the Big Four, I think we need to explore the origins of the genre. Many early thrash bands were influenced by the punk era and the new wave of British heavy metal. While Metallica is often credited as the first thrash band, Exodus was actually the first band to form, founded by future Metallica guitarist Kirk Hammett and drummer Tom Hunting, and they would form in 1979. Their formation would be the crux of the Bay Area thrash scene. Metallica would form soon after in Los Angeles in 1981, followed by Slayer, Anthrax, and Megadeth, and a whole bunch of other first-wave thrash bands. This era was pivotal for metal, and thrash would eventually see mainstream success. And out of this, the Big Four would be born. The term the Big Four of thrash seemingly came out of nowhere. It might have been a sales tactic put on by their labels, or it might have been to represent the most talented bands in the scene. Regardless, it quickly began to represent Metallica, Slayer, Anthrax, and Megadeth. Whether or not it truly represented the best of the thrash bands, it quickly became synonymous with these bands. In the early 90s, the world would get the first taste of a real Big Four lineup. At their peak, all four bands were in high demand for a world tour together. Metallica, having just released the Black Album, was in a league of their own, and they decided not to join this tour. But the other three, Slayer, Megadeth, and Anthrax, would all combine on the Clash of the Titans tour. This tour started in Europe in the fall of 1990 and would end in America in 1991. This massive tour also featured Suicidal Tendencies, Testament, and a young Alice in Chains. Sadly, this tour also marked the end of thrash's mainstream stay, and fans wouldn't see a lineup like this for another 20 years. On June 16th, all four bands finally shared the same stage together, during the Sonosphere Festival. This historic lineup continued for another 13 shows after that, culminating in a final performance in Yankee Stadium in 2011. And this was an incredible feat almost unimaginable in the 80s. While all four of these bands have certainly cemented their legacies, do they actually belong in the Big Four of thrash? So I wanted to take a look at the list as it is now, and look at the pros and cons for each band, and discuss why these bands belong in the Big Four, or don't belong in the Big Four. Firstly, we need to talk about Metallica, because they are the most commercially successful of the Big Four. They were crucial in helping create the thrash scene, releasing their first album in 1983. Metallica beat everyone to the punch, and toured relentlessly to boost their popularity. Their first four albums are considered some of the best in the thrash scene. Even if you want to debate Master of Puppets or And Justice for All as thrash albums, Ride the Lightning and Kill 'Em All certainly do fit the bill. Their main drawback for a lot of people are the four albums that came after that.
You're really good at that. I was straight up with you and I told you I'm in a shit mood, and what have you been doing? Fucking picking at me all night.
Come on, guys. We got better things to do. Right?
Yeah, I do. I do.
They were more metal and heavy metal, but not thrash, and a lot of people hate them for that. However, their next three albums was more reminiscent of their earlier work. Love them or hate them, Metallica is a vital band of the thrash scene, and a really good gateway band for a lot of new fans. Next we have Slayer, which is arguably the most universally loved thrash band. Most people at least like Slayer, and a lot of people idolize them, and a lot of bands are influenced by them. Slayer carved their own path, creating darker music and pushing boundaries in thrash that were not seen at that time. They have a run of 5 albums that a lot of thrash fans love, and the 3-album run from Rain and Blood to Seasons in the Abyss is also considered some of the best of the thrash scene, and is only rivaled by the other bands in the Big Four of thrash. While they can get a bit repetitive at times, but what band really doesn't, Slayer's impact and legacy in thrash are undeniable. Moving on to Megadeth, led by Dave Mustaine, we have a more diverse sound, like Metallica. And they do hold the record for releasing the most albums of these 4 thrash bands, which is understandable given their longevity. Mustaine's leadership is a strong argument for why they belong in the Big Four, as he not only founded Megadeth, but he influenced Metallica and Slayer early on. Their first 4 albums stand among the best, but like Metallica, they had a string of albums that were not thrash, and were more heavy metal. But then as we've seen later in their career, they also returned to form. While some might overlook their shift in sound, it is worth considering it a drawback, especially if you consider it a drawback for Metallica. Additionally, Dave's vocals are a bit weak, and they're my least favorite part of Megadeth. but his lead work and all the lead guitarists that he brings in more than make up for that. Lastly, we have Anthrax, the smallest commercially of the Big Four, who boasts 11 studio albums, but those albums have taken a lot of twists and turns. While their first 3 albums stand out, they too would experiment with their sound and later return to their roots. But I think several factors hold them back. They can be really challenging to get into because of their vocals. Belladonna's a very talented vocalist, but it's just not for me. And I don't think their albums match the strength of their peers. While they have seen some commercial success, I don't think their legacies are as high as the other 3 bands. But they do have a very unique sound. Now that we've talked about the bands in the Big Four, I want to talk about who belongs in the Big Four. And you honestly can't go wrong having Metallica, Slayer, and Megadeth cemented in the Big Four. You could argue otherwise, but I believe they've solidified their positions. They're all very commercially successful. They have very unique sounds that if anybody tried to copy, it would just sound like them. They have remarkable songwriting, and they have at least 3 amazing albums, and these bands have done them right in a row, which I think is very impressive. I think it's really challenging to argue any other band that could beat those 3. Unfortunately, that leaves us with Anthrax, the underdog, in my opinion. And a lot of people use them as the punching bag of the Big Four. Many people see them as the odd man out, and in my opinion, I think they're right. While Anthrax boasts a unique sound, I personally don't believe they have 3 outstanding thrash albums. They have 1 for sure, but I don't think they have 3. Also, they are the least commercially successful of the Big Four, which I think counts for something because fans decide whether you're popular or not. Despite their admirable authenticity, they struggle to measure up to the other 3 bands. While I know a lot of people do love them, I find it challenging to argue for them being on the Mount Rushmore of thrash. So then that begs the question, who does belong to be there? And are pretty commercially successful.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine, and you're not really fine, and you just can't get into it because they just
Fuck. Oh, that was a fucking setback. So firstly, we could look at Exodus. They are the first thrash band to form in 1979. They were founded by Kirk Hammett, who would later go on to play Metallica, and they still feature Gary Holt, who I think is a very important guitarist in the thrash scene. He has a very unique sound, really good guitar playing, and I think he's an icon of the scene. They have a very thrash-rich discography. I think that really helps them a lot too, because they didn't really change up their sound. To me, they sound a little bit generic, but I think it's important to remember that they set the tone for the scene, along with Metallica, Slayer, and Megadeth. A lot of bands try to emulate them, I believe. So I think that's why they sound generic to me, because there's so many bands that came after them that try to sound like them. Then we have the other Bay Area thrash bands like Testament, Dark Angel, Death Angel, Violence, Forbidden, and all those other Bay Area thrash bands. They all boast their own unique histories and rich discographies, but I don't think they're as commercially successful as the other bands that would be in the Big Four, so I don't know if they hold enough weight to be in the Big Four, but they're worth mentioning. Also, I don't think they have an album that stands up to Master of Puppets or Rain in Blood or Rust in Peace, but I could be wrong. Then we have bands from the East Coast like Overkill and Nuclear Assault, who played in the early days with Anthrax. Again, really rich histories with deep discographies. I think Overkill has something like 25 albums, which is crazy, but again, not as commercially successful, and I don't think they have an album that would stand up with Rain in Blood, or Injustice for All, or Peace Cells. Then if we want to look outside the United States, we have the Big Four of thrash from Germany, who is Creator, Sodom, Destruction, and Tankard. Creator, I think, is the biggest pick from this region. They have a very long career with a very rich discography, a very unique sound that not a lot of other bands have. They're very popular. Although I don't extensively know their discography, I do know that very early on they had a very good run of very important thrash albums, including Pleasure to Kill, that I know a lot of people consider one of the best of the scene. Sodom, I think, is also right up there with them. They have a very unique sound as well, and a lot of really good thrash albums, so they could also potentially be picked. Then we have Destruction and Tankard, who I think are a little bit weaker because they're not as commercially successful, and I don't believe they have an album that could stand up with Ride the Lightning, or South of Heaven, or So Far So Good So What. But I'm not very knowledgeable about their albums. I took a quick listen and I wasn't very impressed, but I could be wrong. Then lastly, I think it would be criminal to not mention Sepultura. They have a very unique sound, a really wide, diverse discography, but very early on they were a very good thrash band. And I think they boast at least 3 albums that could stand up with the Big Four that we have now. I mean, Arise to me is one of the best thrash albums of all time. They're also very commercially successful, and I think they boast very important, iconic members to the scene in Max and Igor. Even though they have left now, I still think they make some good music, and they really have cemented their legacy in the scene. Now that I threw out some picks, I want to talk about the band that I think should replace Anthrax. I think the biggest contender for that spot is Exodus. I don't really like them that much, because they do sound generic, but thinking about it now, they are the first band, they were pivotal to the scene, They were influenced by Kirk Hammett, who does belong in the Big Four. Gary Holt's an icon of the scene, and like I said, they're generic, but I think they're only generic because other bands have copied them. Originally, I didn't see it, but looking through it now and thinking about it, I think they would be the best pick to replace Anthrax if that was ever to happen, but it's not going to because that would be just silly. I think they've probably deserved a little more notoriety than they've gotten, but that would be my pick to be the Big Four. It would be Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, and Exodus, just because those bands are pivotal to the scene. They helped create it and they helped nourish it, and they put out the best works in that scene. Pinpointing the Big Four of thrash could lead you down many roads. As you've seen here, I gave a bunch of good picks, but this is just my subjective take. Given the band's pedigree and Gary Holt's thrash mastery, I firmly believe Exodus deserves a spot. I know that's not groundbreaking to say, but I think they do. On the other hand, if I was going to go with what my heart would be telling me, I would pick Sepultura. I think they're the next strongest pick if Exodus didn't exist. I just absolutely love that band, and that 3-album run is just amazing, and I think you should check it out if you haven't yet. And they have seen a lot of commercial success. Having said that, Exodus just edges them out just a little bit. This is just a really fun thought experiment, and at the end of the day, Anthrax has earned their spot in the Big Four. They're a very unique band, and I know a lot of people do love them, but they're just not for me, and that's okay. I don't hate the band, I don't think they're garbage, they're just not for me. Although I will say, Among the Living is a really good album, and I think it deserves to be in like a top 10 list for thrash. But let me know what you think in the comments. Do they deserve to be in the Big Four? Which bands would you have in the Big Four? I'd love to hear it. Then, because I love modern thrash as much, if not more, than the 80s thrash, I wanted to give you a Big Four of thrash for the modern day. My first pick would be Warbringer. I think they're a very solid band. They definitely have a 3-album run that is amazing. If you've never heard of them, check them out. I think they put out like 7 albums, and they're all very good thrash albums, but I think 3 of them stand out immensely, their first 3. The next I would pick Evile. They're like my underdog pick. They were very influential in my teenage years and still to today. I think they have some of the best work that a lot of people do not realize. Their first 4 albums are really good, and they are one of my favorite bands still, alongside Warbringer. Then I think a newcomer deserves to be here, Power Trip. I think they only have 2, maybe 3 albums, but they have had such an impact on the scene that a lot of people do love them. And I think they're making a comeback soon with a new vocalist. But I think they deserve to be on a Mount Rushmore of modern thrash. Then lastly, I think it would be Criminal, not to mention Municipal Waste. They're the quintessential pizza thrash band, and I think they are key in reviving the scene that we have now. Much like the Exodus of the modern day, they really set the tone for what is happening now. So yeah, if you never checked out any of those bands, please do check them out. I think they're amazing, and I'd like to do videos on them at some point. Thank you for watching this far, and if you haven't already, please subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I like to do a lot of thought experiments like this. I like to break down the history of metal bands. I like to look at the bands that I love, do guitar stuff. So if you like any of that, please subscribe to my channel, because I'm definitely going to be doing more. If you have an HX Stomp and you want more tones for that, I have a Patreon store where I'm selling some guitar tones for the HX Stomp. I have one for Master Puppets and Injustice for All. Then I have 4 just generic metal guitar tones that I like to use. So if you're looking for more tones on your HX Stomp, you might want to check those out. So if you like this video, I'm going to recommend you to check out this one. I did a video on Seasons in the Abyss by Slayer, one of the Big Four bands of thrash. I looked at the history behind the album, broke down some of the songs, and played some of the guitar parts, and looked at making a guitar tone for the album. So if you like this video, and you really like Slayer, you might want to check that one out. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.